Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to announce that the Ash-Carter Exchange has resumed. And it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker of the exchange, the 21st Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, Jr. Chairman Brown will discuss his strategic guidance to the U.S. military to accelerate change or lose with Ylli Bajraktari, President and CEO of the Special Competitive Studies Project.
Chairman, good afternoon. First of all, thank you so much for coming back so fast. I think it's all clear now, so we can resume the program. Chairman, thank you so much for staying.
No, actually, I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody coming back as well. Thank you.
And we wanted to end the Ash-Carter Exchange on a high note, and there's no other way to do this except when you have the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, C.Q. Brown, Jr., who just assumed the duties 7 months ago. He was last time in front of our audience 12 months ago when we had the first Ash-Carter Exchange. So I wanted to start by just asking you, 7 months ago, you entered a different world. We live now in a completely different world. So just your observations for the first 7 months in your job.
Well, it has been dynamic. And when you really think about it, the end of my first week is when Hamas went into Israel. You already had the conflict that's going on in Ukraine. We already had our pacing challenge of the People's Republic of China. And what I've watched over the course of the 7 months is really reflecting on our national security, national defense strategies, where it outlines our 5 challenges: People's Republic of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremists. And what I've found is that all 5 of those are active. And in some cases, we're working together or interconnected in some form or fashion. What I've also found as I've come in is just the tremendous talent we have. Matter of fact, just this earlier today, I had a chance to speak to our airmen that are stationed in Jordan and in the Middle East, and the work they did back on the 13, 14 April, and with the rest of the coalition. And so just amazing work by a very talented group of young people and older people as well, but just our service members, and I couldn't be prouder of the work that they do, and the work that working with the Joint Staff as well, and how impactful they've been in the work that they do as well.
Thank you, sir. I would like to start by asking for each of the challenges we have. So let's start with China first. I know you just came back from Indo-PACOM area of theater. Just your observations of how do you see the situation there? Obviously, we see now in the news for the last 24 hours that Chinese hackers have gone into the UK's MOD systems. So let's start with China. How do you view the situation? Where are we in that relationship and in great competition with China?
Well, as the 2018 National Defense Strategy and the 2022 National Defense Strategy outlined People's Republic of China. And I'll just tell you what the focus I've seen across, not only here in the United States with our military force and our national leadership, but also with our allies and partners that came in across loud and clear when I was in Hawaii last week for the Indo-PACOM Change of Command. I can really go back 6 years. When I went in to be the Commander of Pacific Air Forces in July of 2018, we weren't as focused. But what I've seen is pretty much a dramatic shift with many of the nations in the Indo-Pacific, many nations around the world focused on security in Indo-Pacific, because it is so important from a security standpoint, from an economic standpoint. What I also see is that as we increase our capability and our relationships, also watching how the PRC evolves as well. Realizing that Taiwan just had its election, their inauguration is here in just about a week and a half, and it's something we're going to have to pay attention to for an extended period of time. I do not see that a conflict is imminent or inevitable, but part of our job is to ensure strong deterrence, working with allies and partners to ensure our national interests and the interests of our allies and partners as well.
Thank you, sir. When we talk about readiness for the Indo-Pacific contingencies, you're dealing also with a war in the European continent. So there's a lot of debate about today versus, midterm horizon. So how do you assess the challenges in the European continent? I know you work a lot with your allies and partners. We've gone since the last 12 months. You talked to us in a cycle of, Russia was on the back foot, completely re-innovating their economy for warfighting purposes. We luckily passed a bill to continue supporting Ukrainian forces. How do you assess the situation in European theater, and how does that impact our readiness?
Well, what I will say, I've spent time working with NATO throughout my career, particularly as a senior officer. And the thing I found is how strong NATO is and how, communicating, in addition to two countries larger, and our real focus on not only European security, but more global security. And so from that perspective, I see that's important. The other thing I see is with Ukraine. Ukraine wants to have a independent sovereign nation and be able to defend itself. And when resourced, you can see what they've been able to do. They were able to gain back 50% of the terrain they lost at the beginning of the conflict. You also see what they've been able to do to continue to defend while they waited for a supplemental. I appreciate now that we have this the national security supplementals laid in. That helps Ukraine. And now they can actually continue to focus on their defense and continue to slow down the Russians' incremental gains. But I think the other key part of this is not only does this supplemental help Ukraine, but it also helps us in our defense industrial base to provide us capability to ensure we're ready for whatever comes our way as well.
Appreciate it. Next, turning over to Iran. Iran was on your radar 12 months ago, but not as it is probably now. So just assessing the situation in the Middle East, the Iranian role and their support for proxies and how they're making your life difficult in day-to-day job.
Well, I'll just say Iran's been on my radar for a long time. I've had a number of assignments in the United States Central Command. It's something that I've gotten pretty up to speed on even before this past year coming into this position. I've watched throughout particularly my career as a senior officer, how Iran operates through its proxies. And, the events on 7 October, the way I've just talked about it, it's opened up windows of opportunity based on what Hamas did. It basically opened up the Iranian-aligned militia groups to be able to put pressure on our forces in the region. We've been able to defend ourselves. We've been able to strike at a time and place of our choosing. And I think we sent back in February, being a pretty strong message. It's been over 90 days since the last time our forces have been attacked. We take force protection very seriously, but we also think about what happened here the middle of last month and the aspect of Iran striking into Israel, very unprecedented. And it really puts I think the region a little bit more on edge. And it's something we have to pay attention to in the future as well, and where Iran plays out as far as in our national security, one of our national security challenges.
And then lastly, North Korea, so whether it's a direct threat to us or to our South Korean allies, or helping, Russia in their efforts in Ukraine, how do you assess the situation with North Korea?
Well, North Korea, just having watched, really, if you go back to about 2017 timeframe, where there was a lot of activity associated with North Korea, but that has not really stopped. I mean, their ballistic missile development and the launches of ballistic missiles still continues. What I also see, and you also mentioned the fact that they are also providing capability to Russia as well. And so you see that interconnectedness. What I think also what we've seen because of what North Korea has done, it's also strengthened relationships between U.S., Republic of Korea, and Japan. Matter of fact, I've had a chance to sit down with my counterparts from both Republic of Korea and Japan, and looking at how we work closely together. There's trilateral exercises between our three countries because of the importance of how we think about deterrence in Northeast Asia, and so the ability to work together. And that's one thing I'm finding really around the world is more and more, because the world's gotten more complex, there's more desire to work together with like-minded nations that have the same values and have the same security interests, same economic interests. Our ability to work with allies and partners, I found has been pretty important.
And then lastly, all of them together in totality we call them at SCSP axis of disruptors, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. We have seen since, the limitless friendship statement by Putin and Xi Jinping, much more collaboration and cooperation among these. How do you see this from where you stand, this trend unfolding for the last couple of months?
Well, I mean, there is, I like the term axis of disruptors. It's a different relationship. And what I mean by that is probably more transaction than what we see with our allies and partners. Our allies and partners have shared values, shared interests, and really work close together. And it's not transactional. We do truly work together. And I see that in my time, not only as a chairman, but I've spent all my time as a general officer, not in Washington, D.C. until I became the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And I spent a lot of time working with allies and partners. That's the sense I get as I engage with our allies and partners. I also, as I engage with them as well, is how much they value U.S. leadership. 7 months, I've probably had about 170 engagements with my counterparts, either on the phone, video teleconference, at a conference. I had several of those last week when I was in Hawaii. I met with 5 of my counterparts, sit-down meetings with 5 of my counterparts, in addition to some that I had a chance just to shake hands with at the reception. But the real value of being able to work together, which is much different from the axis of disruptors, where it's a axis of convenience versus truly working together.
Speaking of allies and partners, so this summer, Washington is hosting the NATO summit. It's the 75th anniversary of NATO. NATO has changed a lot. I mean, as you know, the war in Ukraine has really pushed NATO to dig deep, invest and deploy capabilities. How do you see post-summit NATO, and what does that vision look for you as the chairman?
Well, I think that I think the summit actually helps us to strengthen NATO and sit down and work and think through, collectively more our longer term. We've worked through what's been happening in Ukraine, but what goes on beyond Ukraine and how we continue to work together. Matter of fact, here next week I'll be in a conference with all the NATO chiefs of defense, and part of our conversation, the one we had in January, was the things we need to continue to do to improve our readiness, to improve our capability, and realize that as the NATO nations continue to increase, their money towards defense, making sure we are all collectively putting in the right places to make sure we're looking at how we stay interoperable and provide capability, not only for our individual national security, but how our security for the alliance and why that is so important.
And then we have a new set of alliances and regional structures in the Asian Pacific. We have with the Quad, we have the AUKUS. We had an amazing summit at Camp David by the prime ministers and presidents of 3 countries. So how do you see that alliance network in Asian Pacific shaping going forward?
Well, it's not quite NATO. It's where you have 32 nations that are all working together. But you do have like-minded nations that want to work together, and as you highlight, the Quad with India, Japan, and Australia, but also a Quad that we saw, you may have seen last week, was with Australia, Japan, United States, and the Philippines. And it's how and what I'm also seeing across the Indo-Pacific is nations that have not typically worked together are starting to work together more closely in exercises and events. And, exercises and having spent quite a bit of time in the Indo-Pacific, going back to when I was a lieutenant, exercises that were just bilateral have become multilateral. And that's an important aspect of us working more closely together in an aspect of not only having a capability, but also having ability to deter.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to turn now we were at the Ash Carter Exchange, and Secretary Carter was the biggest advocate for innovation in the military. And so I'm going to use one of the quotes from last year. You told the audience that there are pockets of innovation throughout the department, but we still are missing processes and structures to get innovation into the hand of the operators. You've been now 7 months in your job. I'm sure the building has not changed in 7 months, but are you seeing moves towards the change?
I am. There are still pockets of innovation. I was thinking about what I said last year. The challenge sometimes is the structure and process. And in the event we had a chance to sit down a little bit last evening, structure and process is sometimes where good ideas go to die. And that's the part we have to get past is how do we change the culture from an innovation standpoint and be able to move things forward. So I do see that we're getting better. I do see the connection we have with the innovators outside of the Department of Defense is getting better. But we still have room for improvement. And really over the course of the past year, we often talk about the Valley of Death and the bridge across that valley. And the question I posed to my staff, both at the Air Staff when I was still the chief and most recently with the Joint Staff, whose responsibility is it to build a bridge? I don't think it's the innovator's responsibility that they should build a bridge to us. We should be building the bridge to them and make it easier for them to come to us. And the real goal is how do you take a prototype and turn it into a program of record and do it very quickly? And how do you scale some of this capability? It's one thing to have the innovation, but how do you take that idea and do it at scale? And those are the things we have to work together on to take these pockets of innovation and move them forward. The last thing I'd probably say on this is also just the talent management and the culture, because sometimes those innovators that are in uniform, because they are non-traditional thinkers, don't follow a traditional career path, and they could top out at a certain level. Well, we've got to make sure folks like at my level and others at the senior level are actually trying to find those folks and put them in a place and give them the top cover to go execute, because we value them. And we've got to make sure that we promote those that we value and put them in places where they have the opportunity to shine.
Going back to last year's interview again, sir, because I think it provides such a good reflection on where you were as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force versus where you are today as the Chairman. I asked you about the AI, and you said DoD does not fully understand it. Is that still the case? Have you seen moves towards just using these large language models for basic, admin jobs in DoD?
I have, and so I think we're better off than we were last year. I think last year I felt like we put AI on a PowerPoint slide as if it was going to solve all our problems. I felt the same way probably about 15 years ago with cyber. And now that we have a better understanding, I do see some use. One good example that we've looked at, I went to our military entrance processing station where we bring in our new recruits. And as we use our MSH Genesis, which is our digital medical records, is using large language models to sort through the records to identify things that they need to take a look at as you're trying to bring in a new recruit. So, that's one example. The United States Central Command using Maven. I have it on my desktop to take a look at, but use that to help in our targeting process. And so I do see that this is coming along, and it's getting to a point where we're getting better at doing it. Now, there's still more, we can do. And part of this is having, in some cases, those that know what they want to do, achieve, and talking to those who actually know how to, the technical experts on how to pull it together, bringing them together with the operational need and the technical piece, and being able to, we use AI and tools. And we're making progress, but again, still more work to be done.
You were really clear with your guidance, accelerate or lose.
Yeah.
And I don't think how you can be more clear than that when you send a memo to the building or to the Joint Staff. Do you want to expand a little bit on what you meant by that? And what does winning or losing in your mind means in both scenarios?
Well, first thing, personally and professionally, I don't play for second place. If I'm in, I'm putting my best foot forward to make sure we are going to win. I think our national security is at stake, and I've spent my entire adult life focused on our national security. Now, when I wrote Accelerate, Change, or Lose as the Air Force Chief, I wrote that partly because I had a sense that, the world was going to change. And not that I'm a Nostradamus and can predict the future, but it's just watching how things have evolved. I knew that we needed to do some things based on the national defense strategy and the fact that we had, focused on counter violent extremist type effort, knowing that wasn't going to be the way we were going to have to operate for an extended period of time. I also had time in joint jobs looking at the Air Force from the outside so I could critique my own service. And I thought there were some things we needed to change. So we did. There's some things we moved forward, and I'm very fortunate. The person who succeeded me was my vice chief of staff, and so what Dave Altman is doing is going to follow through. So I told him, hopefully I broke the momentum of inertia, or broke the inertia to get the momentum going, and move things forward. That was part of the conversation I had today with the airman I spoke to. We talked about mission command and how they use parts of our doctrine that we changed back in April of 21. And so I still believe in accelerated change or loose. We still got to, I mean, we're moving faster, but you can always go a little bit faster. You can always do a little bit better. And I don't think you could ever say, kick back and go. I think we can accelerate just enough and kick back and cruise because the threat's going to evolve, and we've got to make sure we stay ahead of the threat.
And just for your record, General Alvin was earlier today.
I heard.
Yeah. My last question, sir. When you look at the next 5-7 years, or the near term to midterm, you're going to be in the chairman's role, probably the most consequential chairman in the history of our country, given the array of challenges, given the public rhetoric of some of our adversaries. How do you think about the way ahead, like the next 3 to 5 years? What should be our priority as a country? What can we do as a whole of nation, to address these challenges that we have in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, these are clear challenges, and you don't have to believe me. You can listen to what the leaders from these axis of disruptors are talking about us, how they think about us. So as the chairman, and you will be in this seat, how do you think about the next 3 to 5 years?
No pressure, huh? I mean, I do think about it. But the way I do think about the next 3 to 5 years is we've got to be able to execute today and be ready for tomorrow. And so it's how do we balance the risk of being able to address today's challenges, but also thinking long about the future challenges and how different events may collide and create a greater challenge for ourselves. And so one of the things I try to do is I try to get smarter every day. My goal is to go home smarter than when I came in the morning. But it's also to make sure that we're doing the same thing with the joint staff, with the joint force, and thinking about where we have potential gaps and seams. And what I told the joint staff is our job is to sit back and try to close those gaps and seams, minimize the risk, and ensure that we are investing into the future to ensure that those young service members that raise their right hand to take an oath, we've done everything we can to give them the tools. When I came in October, I wrote a message to the Joint Force. And one of the things I wrote in there, the first line was, honing our warfighting skills is primacy in all we do. We exist to fight and win our nation's wars. Plain and simple. But we want to be so good at what we do that every day our adversary wakes up and says, not today. And that's where my focus is. And part of that is making sure we have capabilities today. It's also having capabilities tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And that's where my focus is as a chairman with the Joint Chiefs and the Joint Staff and the combatant commands.
Well, thank you. Sir, I wish you all the best in your tenure, and nothing gives me more hope than you being in that chair. So I really appreciate your service. Thank you for staying and waiting for the audience to come back. Please join me in a round of applause for Chairman C.Q. Brown Jr.